the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A state of control.
This is A State of Control, episode number 5, recorded Monday, July 8th, 2013. Configuratable. This is A State of Control, the podcast put on to you by the fine folks at AVNation, looking at the control and automation segment of the AV industry. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. Welcome. Thank you so much for downloading or streaming or listening to this. Thanks for giving us an hour of your time. With us, as always, is Mr. Steve Greenblatt. Steve is the chief muckety-muck. He owns everything at Control Concepts in New Jersey. How are you, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well.
Good to be back.
Doing well. Also with us is Rich Fregosa from FregosaDesign.com. He is a digital concierge. I almost got it wrong.
Actually, I'm bookending it for AVNation.
Oh, yes, you are. He was on this week's episode of AVNation, so eventually we're going to have to pay him something.
Yeah.
That's if we make something. So.
Yeah, exactly. Just pay me in beer. Everybody knows
okay.
He's going to do it for Uncle Richie.
Also from another podcast that we do, this is kind of our recycled version of State of Control, Mr. Matt Silverman. Matt's my buddy from George Mason University. He is a fellow technology manager. How are you, sir?
Doing well. So this is our recycled show, huh?
Yes. But we have two newbies, so it's not completely recycled. We are using some fresh virgin material.
It's like the All-Star team. We put together the All-Star team.
There we go. I like that. I like that. That's it.
Or the waiver wire. It's like the guys.
Let's go with All-Star team. I like that better. It's almost All-Star break, so that works. Two of the fresh meat, as it were. Scott Samsal. Scott's from GreenPoint TDI. How are you, sir?
Good morning. How are you?
Good. And also Bernard Morgan. Bernard is from ICS Plus. How are you, Bernard?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing fine. So what State of Control is we talk about different segments of the automation and control industry for AV. We've talked about the control. We've talked about the fact that some of the control manufacturers have gotten into things other than control. And to that end, this month we're going to talk about the new roles of the AV programmer, simply because the control companies have gotten into other things that's facilitated us that deal with control to get into other things. I mentioned off the air that here recently I am a newly minted Crestron DMCE, which stands for Digital Media something engineer. Maybe I should.
Fortunately, that wasn't on the test.
What is it? Digital Media. What's the C for crying out loud?
Certified.
Thank you, engineer. Maybe I should cut that part out, but I probably won't. Certified engineer, which means I know how to engineer and troubleshoot and stuff. Their DM product. But if you don't know what the DM product is, it's not a control product. So what we're going to do is just kind of take a look at what this has done to the role of the programmer and also kind of how you put together, honestly, your own all-star team. Guys that are and women who are really good at programming and really good at coding, maybe not so good at doing the pretty pictures, and the guys and gals that are good at doing the pretty pictures may not be so good at the ones and zeros. So, Steve, first of all, let's kick it off with you. What has and how has, the role of the programmer changed, not just in the last 5 or 10 years, but honestly in the last 20 years or so?
Well, if we go back to the beginning, and I usually do this with other episodes, so it's not unusual. Going back to our first show, we talked about how what is programming and what is a programmer, and how there's been an evolution, and programmers have always been in demand, and I think that when control was a little bit more primitive, a programmer used to be focused purely on writing code and getting things to work, and systems used to work manually, and just adding control would be an overlay on your system. programming has since evolved to really understanding how the system functions, each piece of device, each device in the system, the user, identifying the user's needs, like you said, designing graphics and user interface, and commissioning and troubleshooting, which I think is really understated as to how much of a role a programmer plays in really making the system work in the end. So we're and I speak from the perspective of an independent programmer, but we want to be involved in the beginning, but we're always involved in the end, and it's really has turned into a vast set of skills to be able to be successful.
Well, and Rich, you've been doing this as long as or roughly as long as Steve has. Over the last few years, here recently, Crestron changed their CAPE, Crestron Authorized Independent Programmer, to CSP, Crestron Service Provider, which was kind of a foreshadowing of this very topic, where no longer do they want you just to know the ones and zeros. They don't want you just to know, the ACNAC and how to get a reply from a projector over 232. They want you to know everything, whether it's, and I don't just mean pick on Crestron, AMX, Aurora. All these guys want you to know their product line inside and out, and how to make those products talk to other guys.
I think it's as opposed to the manufacturers leading the charge. I think they're actually reacting to the market. A lot of companies started originally out as programmers. The control systems programming wasn't exactly something that any of us woke up at 12 years old and said, I'm going to play Pro Ball or program Crestron. It didn't work out that way. We all kind of found our way into this industry, whether, I know some of the guys worked for the mothership. I came from a completely different background. And when we first started out, there just wasn't as many things to control 20 years ago. I mean, that's the reality of it. You had some very simple interfaces in terms of, the gazintas and the gazoutas. It was an IR, a relay, maybe some serial control. And so it was pretty straightforward in terms of the things that we did. So you can go in and just code, and not that many items to choose from. We had a fixed list of items to work with. As the industry's evolved, as control has evolved, as, more and more devices become available to us, I think what happened is, out of necessity, everybody who started out as maybe strictly a programmer went, I've got to be the expert on everything about everything, because sending the signal out was only one part. Understanding what it was going to do down the line, which we're all still responsible for, was the next evolution. And I think that the people who were successful said, all right, I cannot just be in this bubble of programming. I need to be fully versed in all of this. Developed a skill set and went, well, if I'm doing this, I might as well partner with whoever I'm working with and provide that skill set. And I think, the CSP movement's kind of grown out of that, which there's a whole lot more. And I think programmers were kind of getting a knock in the first place. I know the guys can attest, is that, you may be the most versed guy on site. And, the first thing that people ask is, who's that? Oh, that's just the programmer. Even when you keep your mouth shut, the hairs on the back of your neck kind of bristle up, going, I'm going to say something, but I'm not. And that was kind of the burden that we shouldered at the time. I think now what's happening is that especially from the third party guys like Bernard and Scott and Steve and myself, is that, look, no, we're an asset. We're part of a much bigger picture to help you be profitable. In order to do that, here is what we do. Here is what we are. And by the way, programming is still one of our skill sets, but there's a whole lot more to it. And I think companies are understanding that when you're getting away from some of the manufacturers are trying to provide these turnkey quote-unquote systems. You plug it in, you configure a couple of things here and there. Here's something that is no programming required, which is fine, which, we're all for, because it opens up the market. But when you move into the next level, when somebody needs something very specific or special, that's when somebody like a CSP comes in. And I think that's where we've grown out of it and said, yes, this is why this happens, and you are more than just a programmer, because it isn't just writing code. There's a whole lot more to it. And it's just really interesting to see how we've started to mature. And I think that's what's happened is what we're seeing is it's an adolescence that we're hitting. We haven't quite matured. We're not in our infancy anymore. And everybody's kind of feeling each other out. And part of it is, okay, let's define who we are for the first time.
So we're in our early teens. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Our voices are cracking, and we're getting that little thin mustache from a CSP standpoint.
And huge
do
identity.
We have our learner's permit yet or not?
Well, well, that's a good question, Bernard. I mean, you talk about that for a second. I mean, because not just the learner's permit part, but take this another level, and something that Rich and I have a lot of respect for Rich, and I'm not saying that because he's on the call. He's been preaching the fact that we are still kind of developing, and we are so far behind the software industry and the IT industry even. But this is not just about control. It's about managing the whole process. Everything from whether it's writing the code or moving the project along. You guys, as independent programmers, you guys do a lot.
Yeah, I think if you look at a traditional software model where we were writing software for a specific platform, let's say we're writing accounting software that was going to be deployed on this OS, like a Windows platform, there's a lot more standards in place versus in the AV industry, there is no standard. Everyone does something different, and that makes what the independent programmers have to do. And the AV industry still doesn't have a standard that's across all the manufacturers to send audio and video over a piece of Cat5. Everyone has their own take on it. And because of that, everyone has their own flavor of that, also ripples out into controlling systems. So therefore, there is no true standard in our systems. Everything is custom. So writing customized software, some of the traditional rules of writing traditional software don't apply because of the fact that this manufacturer handles switching differently than this manufacturer here. This manufacturer's protocol is different than this manufacturer's over there, and therefore there's not a lot of common ground that can be used because everything is so customized for the project, not only from a hardware standpoint, but from also a control standpoint, because the control is built on the hardware that's in place.
Well, and Scott, let's talk about that for a second. And I've asked this question before, and I've gotten interesting emails from certain control manufacturers that when I asked the question about can we standardize, can we standardize control? Can we standardize the control programming that we do? I mean, you look at, let's look at Aurora, which is HTML based, and then you have AMX, which the two times I've looked at it made my brain hurt because I'm not a C+ certified programmer yet. But and then you look at Crestron, which with the Simple Plus and the Simple Windows, which is not it's not C+ yet. They're working on C# with the whole new the whole Core 3, but it's a little bit simpler than just lines of code. So is there a way, and if the answer is no, that's fine, that we can standardize on how we all talk to each other?
I don't know if there's a global way. I say at the at processor level and from the ground up, I think we can. All the different manufacturers in dealing with their own engineering and their own master ideas of what's a good time, I think is a pipe dream. But then we're talking about, are we talking about end units? Or are we talking about mid units or head end units? When we're continually talking about devices at the end of the chain, I think it's not as critical as standardization on the front end and getting there. So like Crestron and these other manufacturers trying to go to a more standardized approach will help that streamline into being a more efficient process instead of everybody being completely reliant on one person, which in the past has always been a programmer. Depending on who you get is where that standard has been determined, and that's where I think our industry has been so fragmented, is relying on one person as opposed to a whole. So whether the devices at the end will completely standardize, I don't believe so, but I don't even know if that's the biggest overall issue in the efficiency of our whole process.
So what is the biggest issue?
I think it's perception, reality, and partnerships. The perception is that for so many years is that we were creating some sort of voodoo, and only certain people could get into it, and then the manufacturers didn't buy into all of that on a big level, and then I think the manufacturer didn't look at all the players, and they were just looking at the what does it mean to be able to turn this out. So I think it was fragmented, if I'm saying it right, and to be able to bring everybody together to come up with a standard and really partner together, and that's what we're going for in the CSP range and some of these other independent programming councils, of being part of the solution, not an after effect. And I think that then we can help in that standardization process.
I'm going to bring Matt Silverman in because Matt's a technology manager like I am. He works for George Mason University. Matt, you have a background in project management. You have a background in IT. You have put together some very impressive projects at George Mason. Talk to these guys and talk to the people listening about what's the process? How can they most effectively get involved at the earliest stage? Because they're saying they want to be involved earlier, which I get. But when it comes to the end user, sometimes that's not feasible. So how would you say how would they get involved earlier, so that they're more better able to affect the whole program?
Well, I was actually thinking about this a bunch after actually listening to the last episode, which talked about scopes of work and statements of work. And one of the things that I heard a lot there was, we now start programming after the equipment list is created, but we really need to start thinking about that a lot earlier. At George Mason, we really do things on an architectural level. And what we try to do is start our planning every time we roll out a new set of local GMU standards. I'm getting a lot of static. Is that me or is that everyone? I'm sorry.
That's everyone.
Okay. With that, what we try to do is really start planning, I'd say about a year in advance before we roll out a new hardware platform. For us, we're a Crestron house, and we've had two recent what I'll call platform rollouts. We did first generation digital media products, some 8x8s and 16x16s. And we did about a year worth of planning before we rolled out 6 to 8 different standard designs. We recently updated some of those standards to the DMPS 300 platform. And we actually went with a much more modular approach where we rolled out really a configurable system in the sense that we defined all of our potential inputs and outputs, and then really made it scalable. So this summer when we're rolling them out, I think we're rolling out something like 15 or 17 configurations in the field out of about 65 systems installed. What I would recommend to folks who are looking to get involved in earlier is try to go in and sell solutions. I like that it's now a Crestron, service provider, but I was actually thinking about this. I'm thinking, solution provider is actually how I would start branding it, because where I see this real fertile space to get involved with both corporate and institutions, government, education, is really kind of coming in and helping them develop a full AV architecture, where you understand the 80% types of systems they install, the ones which are their bread and butter, help them come with a unified environment, which includes both a user interface, but also gets into staff support tools, where that they're really able to support their environment. And if you can get involved at that early stage and really help them planning, it creates a long-term partnership both for the service provider, but also for the organization, so that they are now looking more almost at an IT level of creating an architecture rather than really going system by system as we've traditionally looked in AV.
Okay, so Steve, let's take what Matt's talking about and the larger architecture. Is this something where you can take what Matt's saying and you know, George Mason is, first of all, is kind of advanced when it comes to some educational industries or institutions because they honestly have a plan. Is that something where you can introduce to a client and say, hey, you know, look, here is something that, you know, we can build a relationship. Here's an idea. Here is something where we can help you, not just today and tomorrow and for this project, but help you kind of develop something over the longer term.
Sure, and I think that's where a lot of the shift is changing the perception of being a transactional relationship to being more of an ongoing relationship, and even taking a look at a support model rather than just saying that I want to be your partner for this project. I want to be your partner for all your systems or for the lifetime of this system. I think is a better way of looking at it, and also coming up with some innovative ideas where you are adding some more value add and customization to, and I like the way Matt put it, as a solution. And I think that there are some solutions that can be sold to different clients, but there are some solutions that really need to be tailored to a specific client. And I think that type of innovation is really taking programming to the next level.
But some of that is, correct me if I'm wrong here, some of that is your core competencies, right? Like you have certain things that you know that you can do, and you can do them as good or better than anybody else. And so those are the things that you're going to offer. And then if there's something that comes up that says, you know, that they want you to do X, Y, or Z, it's something that you're going to be honest with the client that says, you know what, it's not something we do, or absolutely it's not something we've done in the past, but I have every confidence that we can either learn it or get the competency level that you're looking for.
Absolutely. It definitely has to start with a core competency, but I think listening to what the clients are asking for or needing, and then potentially building a staff or a talent pool to be able to answer that demand, I think is really one of the keys. And but of course, you know, you don't want to commit yourself to something that you can't do.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of you know, do we want to live within the world that we've been in, and keep programming or programmers as being a you know, this small world solution and need, or do we want to branch out and become a bigger player? And more of a consultant, I guess, could be looked at as, you know, programming is what we provide, but we want to be hired as a consultant to solve problems or provide knowledge.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because in the notes, Steve's the producer of the show beyond anything else. And in the notes that he gave to all of us, he said, you know what, let's look at programmers as consultants. Let's look at that relationship as a consultant. And Steve has a good relationship like that, and so does Rich. And Rich, just based on my knowledge of both of those guys, talk for a second about how that relationship is developed, because there are people that, because you've told me stories both while we're recording and while we're not recording, about how you have relationships with these people, and they'll call you either as the project is developing in their head even, or it's starting to develop, and you're like, you know, why don't we try this instead of this, whether it's a product or whether it's a workflow, or whether it's even getting down to project management, where you'll say, you know, can we try installing X instead of Y, you know, a week or two beforehand to make sure, you know, that it's all working. How do you develop that relationship where you're looked at as a consultant and not just the guy that makes my Cestron work?
Well, I mean, that's the rub right there. I mean, it was funny is that we were just going into the consultant theme, and I was about to jump in, is that it's tough because there is a consult. You know, again, I'm speaking from the resi world, so the electronic architect is still not a well-known process in the residential market, and it's becoming more and more. And we coined the term, you know, a couple of decades ago, but in the industrial and commercial and everything else, you know, the consultant, the AV consultant, tends to be an established part of the process, or the facilities manager, and so the programmer comes in to be a cog in that wheel. The hard part is where do you go in terms of showing your worth, but also making sure you're not biting the hand that feeds you. Because at that point, God knows that, guys who have technical backgrounds don't sometimes have misplaced egos.
Jeez.
There is that danger about letting your technical aspirations override your business aspirations. And as a consultant, it is a matter of establishing trust by providing solutions, which is what, again, I think that Matt absolutely nailed it on the head. You are a solution provider. You're an end result provider. You're getting somebody from point A to point B. Everything that happens in between, the person who's paying your bill doesn't care. They really don't. So to spend a whole lot of time going, this is what I do, and breaking it down, they don't care. What matters is, how am I going to get it? Can I get it efficiently? Can I get it economically? And can I get it reliably? So, how can a third-party programmer kind of jump that gap? They have to make sure that they are completely focused to being part of the team and supporting everybody else around them, which sometimes is a hard thing to do because sometimes, again, I've been guilty of this, is mistakenly thinking that I'm the smartest guy in the room and not always looking at the whole picture of what's going on. I start looking at what I think should be done, which may or may not be may not be the result of conversations that have occurred that I was never a part of. So, sometimes the hardest part about, becoming a trusted consultant is knowing when to offer your advice and then being able to follow through with it. And I think that as third-party programmers are trying to step into this, branching out and getting a breadth of experience sometimes trumps getting a depth of experience, making sure that you can answer on different elements, because you never know which item might actually be attractive to whoever's awarding the contract. Because again, as a third-party programmer, you're kind of in the middle. You're not a dealer. You don't sell the stuff, so you don't necessarily have a contract with that. You're not necessarily a consultant, so you're not defining the project, and you may not have access to the decision makers. So who is it that you actually are catering to? You're catering to those two established bases, and you have to make sure that you're a value-added proposition and not creating a space where you become another competitive market or another competitive player in it. And it's kind of funny. It's like, well, we talk about all the things that we should be doing. Well, first thing you should be doing is supporting the guys who pay you, because if you do it well enough, they'll keep finding ways to pay you. And as they do that, the projects will grow, and sooner or later you're going to gain the experience from it. I mean, there's no fast way to do it. You can't all of a sudden change your company name to, from Rich's Programming Services to Rich's Consulting Services, and immediately I'm acknowledged as a consultant. You do have to put in your work. And in this industry, putting in this work means doing a lot of back-end stuff that you may not be initially compensated for, even though you think you should. And so it's a difference between your technical skills and the psychological skills of, keeping your ego in check and making sure that you're a team player. That in a nutshell, that's the biggest thing. Focus on being of service. If you are a service provider, you have to have, what's called, they call it in sales, it's kind of this newfangled thing, Again, here comes the West Coast kind of vibe, dude. But, you kind of have to have a servant's heart. You have to be willing to focus your energy on giving, and adding value. And it's a weird thing to say from a business proposition, but in terms of what our industry does, that really does wind up happening, is the guys who are organized and the guys who show that they care. If you can do those two things, it tends to grow from there.
Okay, Matt, I'm going to ask you a hard question coming off of Rich's, be a servant's heart. Is that going to get anywhere with administration or people, the higher end decision makers? I mean, obviously it would affect you because you're the one who has a direct relationship with people like Rich, but people who are above you and me for that matter, will that get to them?
Maybe, and again, it depends on the sales pitch. Been given a lot of thought on what Steve sent out as the show notes, and actually listening to the past couple state of controls. And what I've seen, I think the custom programming industry evolving into is a lot like networking was in the IT industry, 20 or even about 20 years ago, I would say, and really moving from again this manufacturer-centric or even this consultant-centric world to more of a solution-centric world. And I think if people can get higher up in the organizations, which unfortunately Tim is actually probably not talking to you or me, but talking to our bosses in higher education, I would say it's probably at the director or vice presidential level. And coming in and presenting a vision of an environment, presenting a comprehensive solution. And ultimately, if they want to get adoption either in institutional settings or in corporate settings, you have to be solving a problem. It's something I did almost as an internal consultant about 5 years ago here, where when we were making the jump to digital, we also talked about all the other problems we were having. The fact that we still had to physically go to all of our classrooms to troubleshoot them. The fact that we didn't have good remote monitoring tools. And so when we built our first architecture, we really said, how can we solve a problem? And once you get into the business of solving problems, which I think is a lot like Rich said, the servant's heart, you will really speak to those who can sign the big checks. And it's one thing that's always amazed me, and I've had this conversation even here locally when I've had some large AV programming projects where we've outsourced them, is the cost, in my opinion, is actually very cheap in comparison to when I've also outsourced IT programming. I've done some web development stuff. I've done some custom development, had some custom development products as well done on the IT side. And we have to help, at least for people like you and me, Tim, our supervisors understand that to get the same quality we've seen from some of our IT VARs, we need to be looking at similar cost structures and similar, I guess, documentation and delivery structures to what we're seeing on the IT side as well.
I think you brought up a really good point there, Matt. I think the biggest thing about that would be the communication of what that final deliverable is. Mm-hmm. And so many times in the AV industry, it's so project-driven versus service-driven. Yeah. And I think in the software side of things, it's more service-driven than project-driven. And universities are a great example of that, that once the project is done, I call it the kick the tire phase. You typically don't know if that room is a success or not until the end of that semester when you get feedback from the faculty. You may get some immediate feedback, but typically after the end of that first semester was when you would go back in there and do some type of reordering of sources or changing nomenclature. So I think when you take a look at a project, everybody's like, well, the project's done, but when you look at it from a service side of things, it looks like, okay, now we've made it through the first phase of the project, but we still need to service it moving forward. And I think that's where a bit disconnect happens on some of these projects when they say, okay, here's the project, but what about the service? And establishing those two, delineating between those two items.
Knowing who your actual customer is. Making
Exactly.
the facilities managers the heroes will get you everywhere every time.
Mm-hmm.
Giving them the facilities that they need to be able to solve the problem on a daily basis will get you that check every time.
Absolutely.
I think also,
sorry, go ahead.
The ROI a lot of times is really realized on the service side or on the post-implementation side when you have to go and make a change. How did you develop your system so that it doesn't become a monumental task to swap out a device or to add an input or to make the customized changes that Bernard is discussing? I think that speaks to that upfront planning, and I think that's really where you can become the hero and try and recoup or realize the value in your investment.
Well, I mean, to give a real world example of that on a project we're doing right now, I had a sink which wasn't on my AV drawings appear where one of my input locations were, and because we had configuration built into our programming architecture, we just deleted that input location from our configuration file, which meant we updated our GUI, it was removed from our routes, and it was a 5-minute change of just changing an XML file rather than, a whole change order directive. And starting to think in that level, I think, can help people understand the real value in dollars that you're going to see in a return for maybe spending a little bit more on the front end, both in planning and in architecting. But your payback down the road, where you can do a 5-minute change and instantly update your environment, will pay for itself so many times.
Let's take a step. Let me interject a thought that I have here. Again, we're kind of talking on the 30,000-foot view about what we should do it. Who's going to pay for it? How do you create that if you aren't necessarily the key point? And again, here we're talking about, in this specific instance, we were talking about CSPs who are service providers, but you don't provide hardware and you're not the consultant. You're in the middle. So, this is kind of the question that I'm asking is, how many of you are dealing with the facilities person directly? Or are you already dealing through the channel? So, I always view this as, here's kind of the big view of what we're talking about, but then there's the practical side of things. Are you being hired as the third authority to come in along with the consultant and with the installing dealer? Are you fostering the relationship that way? Or are you fostering that relationship as support to the guys who potentially are paying your bill, who might be the dealer, or the consultant? I mean, those are the things that kind of come up in my mind, which is,
this is the shift.
Yeah.
This is the shift I think we're talking about, who our client is compared to who it was 5 years ago. No, our client is not the middleman anymore. Our client's the end user. That's who we shoot for. Before what you just said, Richard. So I would think that that's the major shift.
So at that point, are you basically targeting, who used to be your conduit? I mean, that is the rub for me. Am I now looking to compete with somebody who was my partner, or am I collaborating with somebody who used to be my partner? Well, I mean, that's a very interesting line. As the decision, as we are maturing, what line are you crossing? That's what I was talking about, kind of the breadth of experience. As there are other systems that become available. Can you then leverage yourself that way? Because it does get away from just control. It gets into being a technology solution provider.
Mm-hmm. Well, aren't you kind of doing both though, Rich? And I understand from the architect standpoint and from the integrator standpoint how you guys could be seen as almost like competition at some point, but it's going to take some education for them as well as for the end user to say, look, I'm just looking out for the end user. I'm not looking to usurp your power, Mr. Architect. I'm simply looking to, make sure that everybody in this conversation has all the information and make sure that the end result is exactly what the end user wants. Not, necessarily what is in the spec. And yes, the spec is important. I'm not saying that. And all the documentation is important. But honestly, there's a lot of times where, again, as a technology manager, you look at those specs and you look at the documentation, and yes, everything is exact to the letter, what is in the spec, but it's not what I wanted, or it's not what the department wanted, or it's not what the president's office wanted. Yes, it's exactly to the letter, but it's not what they had in their mind.
Yeah, but then that goes back to scope of work.
Oh yeah.
It is that Achilles heel at that point. And then again, both of you, and to Matt and to you, how many guys do you want to deal with? How many people do you want to have the same conversation with?
But at some point, though, some of these things, like I think it's interesting when Matt talked earlier about the IT side of things. If you take a look at the IT side of the house, the people who are providing the switches aren't always the same people who are provisioning the switch in the data closets. And the same people, they're always not the same people who are doing the infrastructure wiring. So, if we take the argument that the AV industry is doing the same thing the IT industry did 5-6 years ago, the same thing happened in the IT industry where It used to be the people who provided the switch, the network switch, also provisioned the switch, but now that has gone a different way where you call in a specialist to provision the switches and set up your VLANs and things of that nature. I think that parallelism is true in this industry as well, where it can be either side. It is based on the relationship and based on what the customer's expectations are, and also what they expect of service. Are they expecting to say, hey, we want a turnkey solution, and at the end of this turnkey solution date here, we're all done? Or do we want a maintenance contract stating that after 2 months of using the system, we want to come back and adjust some naming, adjust some switching and things of that nature? And I think that has to be defined up front, but it is a very slippery slope that we're talking about here. But I do think that if we model this, we always talk about the conversation that this is very similar to the IT industry. That's what the same thing the IT industry did 5-6 years ago.
No, and I think you're hitting a great point, because it's almost how I was thinking about it in my head as well. And as we look into not just the number of programmable things which are in an AV system, but the number of configuratable, I guess if that's even a word,
it is now,
items that are in an AV system, someone has to be responsible. And it's something as a owner and as a purchaser of AV services is actually something we saw getting dropped on the floor. The consultant was always working at such a high level. At least in the early days of digital, we were seeing integrators just not having the skill set to really get into how do I deal with EDIT and HTTP and all the other fun things, and how do I deal with network-based AV. And we actually locally ended up developing, I think it's now close to about a 50-page configuration guide for our systems, where we get into all of those variables. And I see that being part of kind of this new engineering role. I mean, parallel to what I'll say is a network engineering role, the people who do the provisioning and the configuration and all of that, where there needs to be provisioning of an AV system. There needs to be configuration of an AV system. And right now, I see that almost 100% aligned with programming, because given that everything we do is custom software, half those variables have to come from whoever's going to program the system as well.
Okay, so let me ask you guys. We'll take one last stab at this. Matt mentioned the configuratable systems that we have, and when it comes to whether it is a DSP or it's and I understand there's different education for that as well. Is it the programmer's responsibility, and how is this quote unquote programmer's job title and job roles changing, and where are they now? Like, if you say, you know what, you're a programmer, and Steve, we'll start with you on this one. You hire a programmer, and this is what you're going to do, or you get hired as a quote unquote programmer. What is it that they expect you to do? What's the expectation from guys like Matt and me and other corporations when they hire you? What is their expectation? What do they want you to do?
I think simply put, it's to deliver a working system, but I think that there in no way is the expectation that everything is going to be defined for us and we're just going to live on the keyboard and type everything in and take basically a instruction set and code it. It's more of that we're going to bring to the table knowledge from our past experiences, other clients perhaps, and also ideas to help to define what is the most appropriate solution. And not only that, we're also going to help to advise and talk about should a system be looked at or designed maybe a little differently or a specific way, or maybe talk about best fit for selection of certain equipment. I in my experience, it's been all of those things, and even more so in trying to work with it and to kind of touch on some of the things said in the past, to have those relationships, to be able to work with a consultant, to work with an integrator, and be a team player and almost quarterback the implementation so that everything is in and set up properly and is fully tested, which is another good point to meet what the client satisfaction or expectations are.
All right, Scott. Somebody hires you as a programmer. When you have that meeting, do you explain to them, or how do you explain to them what you do? And if they ask you to do something more than that, do you say absolutely, or do you say, yeah, we can sub that out?
Well, we've done both. I think to Matthew's point, I think that's probably clearer to what our business model is that we're going in pitching structure and architecture to our clients. We're looking at, I speak a lot about a 3-year plan and a 5-year plan for the companies that I'm going in with. And the whole underlying configuration of all of that is a huge part of what we bring to the table with that. And you used to talk about DSP, lighting, network configuration, and custom deliverables. All of that I wrap up into the idea of structure. We're the company that's going to come in and lay the foundation for you, where everybody will know what's going on. That's what, and where the growth happens, what it's going to look like, and what the systems will do and won't do, and also how we service those systems on a macro level and a micro level.
That's very good. Bernard, same question to you. When it comes to programming and how you guys define what a programmer is doing currently, what does that look like for you guys?
Very similar to Scott. I think when we're asked to come to work on a project, we take a look at the big picture, and we try to decide, okay, if someone's asking us to do something that wasn't originally part of what their scope, we take an assessment: is this something that we're capable of doing in our wheelhouse, and what's the best way to get that done? Meaning, is it something that we're competent skill set to do? Is it somebody we've worked with before we could team up to do? But I think it's more importantly to define the scope of what they're looking to do. I think a lot of what we do is really digging into the details of defining what the system needs to do. I think one thing that always happens is we get a project, and then after we get the first project, we have the first meeting, and the first thing after we finish the first meeting is, man, you guys ask a lot of questions. And I think that's what happens. I mean, we have to really get to the nuts and bolts of what the system's going to do. Person sees the interface for the first time and hits the button, it does what they want to do. And in order to do that, we have to ask a lot of questions. And I think from that Q&A process, then things come to life that were never either thought of before or were talked about but were not important at the time, but now bubble up to the surface. So I think if nothing else, we're good investigators, that we go in and we investigate the job and we uncover things that were not thought of before, for lack of better terms.
No, I like that. Mr. Fregosa, maybe you should change your name to Digital Investigator. I like that, Bernard.
That actually is pretty cool. I got to say, it's a pretty cool concept.
If you'll see my job title on my Facebook page, it is Technology Forensics Investigator.
Very nice. Very well done, Scott. So, Rich, if I win the lottery, the big lottery, and I want to hire you, not just like the $1 million one, but if I win the big jackpot and I want to hire you as my programmer, what are you going to bring to the table? What are you going to tell me that you're going to do out of the box as my quote unquote programmer?
It's real simple. I've spent 23 years breaking it every way possible. Well, what people are getting, they aren't buying necessarily programming. They're buying experience. They're buying technology experience. They're buying the ability to deploy, and somebody who's been through it before. And and again, it's a different pitch. It's like Matt was saying, is that it kind of depends on your sales pitch.
Yeah.
And I readily admit I'm one of those weird exceptions in the industry. I came to programming by accident. Programming is probably, not exactly my strongest skill. My strongest skill is listening, and talking, and understanding people. And I really think that CSPs, or whatever we're going to be called, that really is. And if you listen to the thread that we're all talking about, it's about listening. It's about being invested in the human interaction side of things in order to be able to deal with the machine interaction side of things. And that's what people really are looking for. Is they're looking for answers. They're looking for solutions. And our job is to demystify everything else that's downline to go ahead and provide structure, to provide, to ask the questions. The running tagline that I always used to say with clients is that I had 4 accountants in a row, and I fired every single one of them for a simple reason. When I asked them a question and something came up, they said, "Well, you didn't ask." Well, of course. That's why I hired you in the first place. Your job is to ask me the questions I don't know to ask.
Yeah.
That is our job. That's the investigation, the forensic side of things. It is to be able to get to that little kernel that really is somebody's flashpoint and get that delivered and move on, and so, with it is that, again, I call myself a digital concierge, and it's true. What I happen to do is use technology, and some cases it's design, some cases it's project management, some cases it's documentation and engineering, and some cases it's programming. Sometimes it's all of them together. But where people fit in on that a la carte menu, I think that's where we need to start embracing more and more. And companies like Scott's and Bernard's and Steve's already do that. I think what we're trying to speak out to is guys who are saying, okay, I just got my level 1 certification from AMX or Crestron, and I want to be able to do this on my own, or I want to be able to branch out into these new markets. And I think that's what we're speaking to is just that. Make sure that you have your technical chops down, but really focus on the act of communicating, because that's really all that's what the past hour has been. It's been about communication, communication and education. If you really want to take a look at it, it just so happens at the end of the day, we all sit behind laptops and we've got multiple monitors and we're coding like crazy. So again, what do people get? I listen. I listen and I ask questions, and if they like how I answer the questions, they hire me, and we hope for the best from there.
All right, Mr. Silverman, we'll give you the last word as the technology manager. What is it that you're looking for nowadays? Because you're not just looking for a guy that does ones and zeros. What are you looking for when you hire a programmer?
Well, I think these guys really hit it. We're looking for someone who takes time to learn about our environment and figure out what we're trying to do and ask the questions and probes. I recently had one of the most pleasant experiences I've had with a contract programmer in years, where someone took our provided GUI concept and said, I think it's good, but let me give you an alternative. And they actually gave us version 1, which is what we asked for, and version 2, which was what they thought was better. And we said, you know what, you're absolutely right. Let's go with your solution. And it's someone who tries to understand our intent rather than just delivering a statement of work. And that really, for us, leads to a long-term relationship. When you look at us, particularly George Mason, we maybe outsource 10% of our programming. However, it typically is what I'll call unique systems, which, funny enough, either end up on the very, very high end or the absolute most basic systems. But with that, we really look for someone, again, who will understand our environment, talk to us. And I actually remembered after a conference call on this one, I got off the phone, I said, I don't actually know what their work is, but I know they ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And I can't say that enough. It's really someone who's delivering that overall solution and not just trying to do check marks on, an equipment list or a statement of work.
No, I like that. And that will be our last word. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. This has been A State of Control has been Steve Greenblatt from Control Concepts. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And how can people get a hold of you or get a hold of Control Concepts?
I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn and other various social networks going by Steve Greenblatt, pretty simple, or controlconcepts.net.
Very good. Bernard Morgan has been here. Bernard is from ICS Plus. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
And how can people get a hold of you?
Just at our website, www.icsplusonline.com. And from there, you can go through the website and contact anybody you need.
Okay, very good. Scott Samsal. Scott is from GreenPoint TDI. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
And how can people get a hold of you?
Through our website, www.greenpointtdi.com. We also have the same through Facebook and Twitter and all of the social media sites. Just search for GreenPoint TDI.
Okay. Rich Fregosa from Fregosa Design, fregosadesign.com. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It was good times. Good group of guys here. Definitely highly respect their work and glad to spend some time with them.
Absolutely. And how can people get a hold of you?
You can find me on Twitter at rfregosa. You can find me on the website, Fregosa Design. You can find me every once in a while on a podcast with our illustrious leader, Tim. And let's see, also on cepro.com, also one of the CEDIA tweets this year. So if you're in residential or you're curious about the residential market, come see us at CEDIA Expo this year.
In beautiful downtown Denver this year. So
it is. It's going to be a good time. Oh, and use CT2 for your code and get in for free.
CT2. Steve, do you have a code too?
No, not this year.
See, there you go. CT2.
He was an inaugural member. He's OG.
Yeah, wow. That is a phrase I never thought I would hear.
I didn't run for a second term.
Associated with Mr. Greenblatt. OG. Last but not least,
SG.
SG is an OG. Don't let our buddy Hi-Fi get a hold of that, because he'll rap something about it. And Matt Silverman, Matt's from George Mason University. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Where can people find you and your work?
LinkedIn, and if anyone's listening to this, and I guess before August 19th, please go out and take a look at the AV Systems Performance Verification Checklist Standard, which is now in public review at infocom/standards.
Infocom/standards. Matt, by the way, is my standards guru. He knows everything about every standard. So, and my name is Tim Albright. Don't follow me, but go to the website if you would please. AVNation.tv. AVNation.tv, you'll find this podcast and a host of others. Mr. Fregosa made mention the AV Week. We also have an education show that Mr. Silverman is on, and some one on live staging and events, do-it-yourself, and AV social marketing and social media for the AV industry. So check it out, AVNation.tv, AVNation.tv. Saints, thanks so much for listening. This has been A State of Control.